Hello, everyone. My name is Juliet Eden, and I'm a proud member of the University of Georgia's class of 2021. In May, I will be graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in Ecology, a minor in Geography, and a certificate in Sustainability. I currently represent the Odom School of Ecology as a student senator in the Student Government Association. Post-graduation, I'm looking forward to using my degree and the experiences I have gained at the University of Georgia to dig deeper into my interests of political ecology and creating sustainable and meaningful solutions to urban socio-environmental issues. At the University of Georgia, learning doesn't end when the diploma arrives in the mail. We are a community of lifelong learners committed to continued growth and to inquiring into the nature of things. We're spirited and passionate between the hedges, and between the pages, we're curious, open-minded, and ready to explore new worlds and voices. The UGA Alumni Association strives to develop diverse programming that will help to connect over 332,000 alumni around the world to their fellow alumni and to UGA. This virtual book club, Between the Pages, provides an opportunity to enjoy and discuss works by alumni authors with fellow Bulldogs, and I am pleased to welcome you to our fourth book club event. Dr. Delia Owens is the co-author of 3 internationally best-selling nonfiction books about her life as a wildlife scientist in Africa, including Cry of the Kalahari and Secrets of the Savannah. She received a Bachelor of Science in Zoology from the University of Georgia, and she has a PhD in Animal Behavior from the University of California in Davis. Dr. Owens has won a John Burroughs Medal for Nature Writing and has been published in Nature, the African Journal of Ecology, and International Wildlife, among others. Dr. Owens currently resides in Idaho, and Where the Crawdads Sing is her first novel. It has sold over 9 million copies worldwide. The book has won multiple awards, including Best Book of the Year by the New York Times, USA Today, Bloomberg, and others. Where the Crawdads Sing was the #1 selling fiction book in the USA in 2019 and 2020. It has been translated into 42 languages and is soon to be a major motion picture produced by Reese Witherspoon. Valdosta native Malcolm Mitchell finished in the top 10 all-time receivers during his football career at UGA. As a student athlete, he found success on the field, in the classroom, and in the community. He was the first UGA player to ever be named the national captain of the All-State Good Works team, and he received the National Hare Achievement Award, the Atlanta Sports Council Community Service Award, and the UGA Student Athlete of the Year Award. He graduated in 2015 with a degree in communications. In 2016, Malcolm was drafted by the New England Patriots, and in 2017, he became a Super Bowl champion with the Patriots as a wide receiver. In 2015, Malcolm authored and published a children's book, The Magician's Hat, and created a youth literacy initiative called Read with Malcolm. The next year, he established the Share the Magic Foundation to inspire young people to read by bringing book ownership to students in Title I schools and under-resourced communities. The foundation has placed books in the hands of over 65,000 young readers and provided literacy programming to over 200,000 students. In 2019, Malcolm was selected to participate in TED UGA and was named to the UGA Alumni Association's 40 Under 40 list of successful alumni. Malcolm's second children's book, my very favorite book in the whole wide world, was released December 2020. Malcolm will lead a discussion with Dr. Owens for 30 minutes or so, and afterwards there will be time for you to submit your questions. So please be thinking about what you would like to ask. I'm so excited to be here with y'all tonight, and I want to invite you all to enjoy the ensuing conversation.
This is awesome, isn't it? I'm happy to see you again.
Great to see you, Malcolm. It's great to see you again.
This is extraordinary. You are a extremely accomplished person. You have wrote a story that the world loves, and I love it just as well as many others. But I must say, you are one of the most courageous individuals I have ever met. So if you give me 2 minutes to just brag about you, I'd love that opportunity. Is that okay with you?
That's great, thank you, but I am no more courageous than you are. But thank you for the compliment.
I appreciate you. I thank you for the beautiful conversations that you and I have had. You have encouraged me to find acceptance in some of the harsh realities of the environment that I grew up in. You've encouraged me to write a novel. You've just been a very impactful person in my life ever since we met. maybe a year and a half ago, maybe. And I just want to thank you before we dive into the conversation. I mean that to the bottom of my heart. You keep me relevant in my book club circles, that's for sure. Anytime someone brings up the book, I say, you know what? I actually have had a chance to eat dinner with her. So
Well, thank you so much. I feel the same about you. I remember the conversations that we had, all of the things that we talked about, the connection that we felt, because we care a lot about the same things. We care about words. We care about what words mean. We care about how important it is for everyone to be able to read. And I admire so much what you're doing for other people and for children to encourage reading. I mean, that is so important. So I appreciate that a lot.
Well, thank you. This is about you. So let's dive in and talk about and talk about your beautiful story. I've been briefed with a few questions that I'm supposed to ask you, and I am going to stick to those. I don't want to throw you off, but there are a few questions just out of curiosity that I would love to ask you. Is that okay?
Sure. Let's go.
Okay. I must admit, I did a tremendous amount of research on you over the last week. I've watched about 10 interviews that you've done. I've seen you out in the community. I've learned about your fear of driving on highways. I learned about the impact your mother had on your life. But there is this cool kind of concept you introduced a year ago in an interview that I watched, and you talked about the difference of a swamp and a marsh. Do you remember that conversation by chance?
I don't remember exactly which conversation you're talking about, but so yeah, go ahead with your question.
So in your response to the question, what's the difference between a swamp and a marsh? You said a swamp was much darker. And you said we all have those dark phases in our life.
Yeah.
And in 2020, I would say there have been a lot of dark phases for people. And I'm sure people watching this interview have been through some struggles. Is there a difficult moment in your life that you're willing to share as a sense of encouragement only about a time where you have overcome a difficult time?
Well, first of all, let me say, yes, I have to say, since we're speaking at the University of Georgia, that for all the ecologists who happen to be in the audience, that a swamp is a very important place ecology for the earth, as is a marsh. But in the book, I make the distinction that the marsh is a lighter place. And I found in my life and in most people's lives, there are, we all go through dark periods. And one of the important messages I was trying to convey in Where the Crawdads Sing is how to find your way from the darker places into the light. And I have had some serious personal experiences in my life that have been difficult for me to go through. And I think everybody does.
Correct.
And I think that it's important at that time to find the resilience and to know that we can solve problems on our own. And what I have learned from nature, I have learned from nature how to solve some of these problems, because we come from nature. We're part of it. We're not separate. A lot of people think of it as being separate from nature, but in fact, we are very much. We came from nature. We struggled and competed on the savannah to arrive at where we are today. But we can't forget we still have a lot of the instincts that we had then.
Yes.
So when we find our place when we find ourselves in a place of darkness, then we have to find that inner strength. And my particular situations were in isolation in Africa and in personal relationships, and that didn't work out. And it's hard.
And you're strong. You're courageous. Seriously, I think you represent that resilience, and your story is one that I think has inspired a lot of people to overcome personal challenges as well, me included. The main character in your book, Kaya, overcame a series of events. She obviously was in the marsh, isolated, trying to survive on her own. I'm sure you get this question a lot, but I have to ask, is there any synergy between your personal story and the story of Kaya that you wrote in this book?
Yes, there's a lot of me in Kaya, but I think there's a lot of Kaya in all of us. And the part of me that's in Kaya is that I was lucky to grow up in South Georgia. In some ways, I was lucky to grow up in South Georgia. My mother was a real outside girl, and she would encourage me to go as far into the oak woods as I could, whether I was riding my horse or exploring on foot with my friends. She would encourage us to go, and she was the one who actually told me to go way out yonder where the crawdads sing. And so I grew up in nature, and then my first instinct when I thought about career was to study the wild, to study nature, to study zoology. And I, found my way into Africa, studying in some of the most remote areas there. And so I learned my whole experience in life has been to live in nature and to observe nature and to learn from it. And that was Kaya's life.
Yeah.
But unlike Kaya, fortunately, I had a loving family and was not abandoned. So there are a lot of differences, but that is the part of me that is like Kaya. And was the reason I was able to write her is I lived that life to a certain extent.
Yes. And sometimes you can tell me if it's the same for you when you sit down to write a story. One character is made up of many different experiences throughout life. Yeah. In my personal life, I shared with you before we started this live session that I did not grow up with a father in my home. But for a lot of different reasons, football kind of filled some of that gap and taught me some intangibles like responsibility, accountability, hard work, dedication. In the story, we see this beautiful relationship with Kaya and the marsh. Do you think the marsh represents maybe a mother-like figure in her life and helping her navigate through her different circumstances?
Absolutely. There's a passage in the book where when Kaya reaches that point where she's learned how to collect mussels by watching the ravens, and she's just reaching the point that she feels like she can survive, and she reaches down and touches the wet earth, and she feels like the marsh has become her mother. The marsh in this book is definitely a character. The marsh represents nature. It represents the earth. And we use that expression all the time, Mother Nature.
Yes.
But we don't really treat nature like our mother. We very seldom we take and take and take from nature and very seldom give back. And I was very careful in my book to not have the conservation to be, I didn't want the messaging to be too strong. I didn't want the book to preach anything, but there are a lot of themes in this book, and conservation is one of them. And I think the book showed very clearly how much Kaya needed the marsh, and that's how much we need nature. We need nature as much as she needed the marsh. It is the same thing. And so we need to take care of it.
Tell me, as someone who wants to be more involved in giving back to Mother Nature, how I could do that.
Well, there are a lot of ways. I mean, there are a lot of organizations that you can join. Of course, we know there are thousands of them, and it really does help. But also, of course, one of the biggest things we have to worry about now is climate change. So we can work on that on a local level, but we need to get involved nationally as well. That's the biggest issue I think that we should be caring about.
Now, here's a question that I think you're going to love. And I can't take credit for coming up with this one, but I'm interested to know, what do you think of our societal way of following rules and behaving? How does that differ from the natural world that you experienced in Africa? Should I ask again?
Yes, that's it, because I was reading it. That's a different question on the screen.
The question, I saw it pop up too, so I was trying my best not to read it. But the question I wanted to ask you is, based on what you've seen, now that you've had a lot of time back from Africa, you've been all across the country talking about your book. I am just wondering, what do you think is the biggest differences from human society and the natural world that you experienced while you're in Africa?
Okay, well, there's actually another theme of Where the Crawdads Sing, and that is that, and what Kaya learned as well, is that we are primates. Humans are primates. And one of the things that interested me the most in Africa is that how similar our behavior. Every single day, I saw ourselves, I saw humans in when I was observing these animals. I would be watching a troop of baboons, and there'd be a young male baboon, and he'd be strutting along the riverbank. Yeah. And he'd be in front of some females, and he'd go back and forth in front of the females. And I'd think, yeah, I know that guy. And so, we still have a very strong propensity to live in social groups. We have social hierarchies. I mean, females form very strong groups in primates, and we have that instinct to do that. But within the female group, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of competition for right. There's as much conflict as there is from camaraderie. And I learned that by watching hyenas. I also learned that by being in a sorority. I mean, it's true. We just have so many. I would be sitting watching lions on a dune top late afternoon in the Kalahari very often, and I watched them playing with their cubs and sleeping around with each other with their paws draped over each other's faces, and I would miss my girlfriends back home. I felt isolated and alone because I was separated from a group. Right. And yes, Kaya learned that, and I learned that our society is very much like other primate societies. And that's one thing that has affected us during this COVID-19 isolation, is that we evolved in social groups, and now we're forced to live in isolation. I lived a lot of my life in isolation, so I was a little bit accustomed to it. But I learned that isolation does change a person.
I was not prepared.
And if you are forced to be isolated, it changes you. I feel like I am still changed. I was isolated for 23 years, and I feel like I'm still affected by that. I feel like I don't have the self-confidence that I did before as far as being in a group.
Okay.
It does change you. And so, yes, our society is very much.
You are absolutely right. I did not consider myself a very social person. But once COVID came about and I realized how restricted my movements were to stay safe and protect my new family, it was really difficult. And, I searched for many ways to kind of supplement that connectivity and socializing, but there's really no other way to do it besides seeing people. So let's keep going, because I know more of the audience want to know more about the inner works of your story. So help us contrast Kaya's relationship with Chase and Tate. We know that those two just got casted for your movie that will be releasing soon, and they meet your approval with their good looks. um,
Yes.
What do you think each of them offer her, and what do they represent?
Okay, well, this is what I had in mind when I wrote those characters. To me, Chase, the character Chase, represents that part of all of us.
Okay.
That is instinctual. All of us have innate behavior that evolved centuries ago, eons ago on the savannah when we were competing. That he represents the guy who is aggressive. He's not as refined, and we all have those instincts, but we have to learn to control them. He more or less represents that. Tate represents the more evolved human, and in the sense that Tate represents that he loves poetry, that he loves opera, that he tries to control. You don't have to love opera and poetry, but all of us learn to control our instincts, to control our aggression, to be a parent if we don't really feel like being a parent right now, to join in the group and participate the way we're supposed to. In other words, we don't just fight over hierarchy. We try to work it out another way. So those characters represented one instinctual behavior and one learned behavior. And of course, Kaya could tell the difference. And what's interesting is she was attracted to both, which we are. And they saw her differently as well. I mean, Chase was more interested in the sexual relationship and being dominant over her. And Tate was more, as he was interested and loved her, that she was interested in the marsh and they had so many things that they shared together. So that was the two guys represented the two parts of our.
What I love about speaking with you is the depth in which you go when you create anything. We had a lot of conversations before about books that you recommended that broaden my perspective and understanding for the way we operate. But when you make these beautiful connections between what we perceive to be our world and the natural kingdom, and they're really being the same thing, it causes for this interesting conflict for me, because you have these very natural reactions that are sometimes kind of, I would say, useful when playing sport.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, like aggression and
but
competition. Yes.
I tell my friends all the time, the natural actions that take place when you play sports, you can't do in traditional society, the way society is structured today. So anytime you make that connection, it's always insightful.
It's like when you're standing in line at a coffee shop ordering a latte, and someone steps right in front of you in line. Okay, I mean, what do you want to do? You just want to punch them out. You don't step in front of somebody. Don't get between me and my latte. But you can't. On the football field, you can. You were very lucky. But it makes the point.
Yes.
It makes the point of what I'm talking about. We still have those feelings, some of us more than others, but you do have that feeling, but we've learned to control ourselves. It's not always easy.
No, and sometimes expressing those feelings in a constructive way is very liberating and freeing. Why do we think it's and I'm only speculating here, you're the expert, but it really feels good to exert myself when I work out. Like, I really like getting a lot of energy, releasing it, and then I'll go on about my day and I have a good day.
But I think it's because we don't have avenues for releasing that energy the way we need to a lot of times.
How do you release your energy?
But yeah, I have high energy and I have to, you know, run around the, you know, up and down hills or whatever it takes. But yeah, I think that's the point, is that we do have these feelings of that we want to be more aggressive than we can be, but we have to control ourselves. That is frustrating.
What's the consequences in that?
Well, you know, that's another point to the book that I think is very important, which I haven't talked about a lot, is that, you know, in this nation, we have one of the best legal systems in the world. And yet there are many people who fall through the cracks. There are many people, like Kaya is an example. She was not protected by the law. She knew that she could not go to the sheriff when she was in trouble. So the question in the book, one of the big questions of the book was, for those people, sometimes the law of nature is more just than the law of man. And that is a big question for us to ask. I don't know, we had the discussion about whether we should talk about the ending of the book, but whether we actually say these specifics or not, the ending gets to that point of, if our legal system does not protect us, how obviously nothing under those circumstances, the law is going to not work for you. But sometimes taking the law in our own hands, in other words, doing what we would have done on the savannah, is more just. I think it was in her case.
I agree with you, by the way. Your story is one of fiction, but there's a lot of truth in all of this.
Right.
And I had this very intense connection with Kaya once I realized how she was being ridiculed, once I realized how she was exiled, abandoned. And there's this very poignant moment in my life where those things were very real.
Yes.
So while your book is one of fiction, this touches my heart because your character went through a lot of things that I experienced in my personal life. And that's why this story means so much to me. Plus you signed it. I must show it. I must brag a little bit.
Yes, that was actually a very big part of the story. That not only was she isolated, but she was rejected and discriminated against. And that changes a person. When a person is rejected and discriminated against and abandoned, it changes them. And nobody wins in the long run, because those people who are rejected behave differently. And that's not going to work well for society in the long run. Nobody wins. And that was one of the points I was trying to make. It's, you know, you can treat someone like that, but guess what? It might come back to bite you in the leg.
I think that's one of the things that I love about you, is your ability to see so far outside of what society may project. And again, when we write stories, we're usually pulling from many different places. And one of the characters that I fell in love with was Jumpin', because I assumed that at some point in your life that there was an African-American figure who had an impact on the way you saw the world. And because he made it to your story, I assumed it was a positive impact. Yes. But I relate with that because while I was at the University of Georgia, I joined a book club with a bunch of extraordinary women who looked nothing like me, were of a different generation and different gender. But none of that really mattered. The only thing that mattered at the end of the day was, could this group help me become a better version of myself? And when I read your story and Kaya had these beautiful interactions with Jumpin', I resonated with that because Kaya did not care his age. She did not care where he was from. All she cared about was, this is an individual who's helping me be a better me. And that is a tremendous message to send. I'm not sure I don't know if you thought about that when you wrote it or not.
Oh, absolutely. I had a jumping in my life. And my grandfather grew up on a plantation, but his family lost the plantation. And he, as a young man, to make a living, became a rural mail carrier. And it never occurred to my grandfather that this was a lowering of his standards or anything. I mean, he wasn't embarrassed or, I mean, his family had owned a plantation. Now he was a rural mail carrier. That didn't bother him at all. And so he used to take my twin brother and I out on Sundays to drive around to meet the route people, he called them. Most of them were African Americans. And there was this tall man. To me, he was tall as a pine because I was a little girl. And he was one of the kindest people I've ever known in my life. And of course, I lived in a white world because our schools weren't even integrated then. But my grandfather loved these people and they loved him. And I got to know them, and especially through individuals like Jumpin'. And I felt so privileged that I had this window to be a part of their lives that other people didn't have that chance. I looked at it as this beautiful opportunity. Yeah. And I'm sorry to say, because I was a child, I don't remember his name.
That's okay.
But to me, he was Jumpin'.
Yeah. Sometimes remembering a moment is more important than the names.
Right.
That's really cool. I am always taken aback when I read your book, and sometimes I read certain passages. Sometimes I just read what you scribbled inside of it to keep it going. But I'm curious. When you wrote this story, or when you had the idea and over the years jotted down notes to get it to where it is today, what were you hoping that the reader took away? Now, I know there's a multitude of different things, but if you had to pick one, what would that be?
I'm trying to say how much we can learn about human nature from nature itself. That is the primary objective of the book, is to show that we are part of nature and that we can look. Sociobiology is this incredible science that shows how evolution affected other species. And I'm trying very hard, and I'm writing another novel now, and I'm trying to do the same thing, is to bring sociobiology into human experience, to show how much we can learn from that science about ourselves. And I think people are ready to hear it. I think for a long time, we didn't go around saying, well, you're just acting like a baboon. I mean, and obviously that doesn't really say it, but we can learn so much about. I think it helps us understand. To me, watching these animals every day and seeing how they competed over certain things, how they had aggression and very close to the surface, and we have to keep it undercover. But if you see why animals behave the way they do, then you can understand why you feel the way you do a lot better. You can understand that. We see in nature, we see mothers abandoning their child. We see that, their infant, in times of stress. We see many, many males, and most male species and social mammals, the males do not stay to help raise the young. They leave. And some men feel frustrated that they have these feelings to leave. And a lot of these things we can understand ourselves better if we look at nature closer.
Yes. And understanding is the first step to doing something differently.
Yes.
Understanding is the first step to making a conscious decision. I could talk to you about this all day. I think that's where I'm at in my phase of life, being a new father, being retired from something I did for so long, stepping into this new career. There's this influx of emotions that I've never really had to decipher through. But what you're saying is I can look to nature to help me better understand myself, which makes me more comfortable with the decisions I make daily. That's incredible. I would keep going, but we have to take questions from.
We're getting these notes on the screens to do something.
Yes. Okay. I was shocked by the ending. It seems so out of character for Kaya. What do you think drove her to this premeditated, intentional final action?
Premeditated. Well, that's one of the things we've been talking about, is that she took, under our laws, self-defense is illegal in our country. You can kill somebody in self-defense. You cannot kill another person with a premeditated self-defense. That's not legal. But Kaya didn't have a choice. She knew that no one was going to protect her, or that's the way she felt, because she'd been abandoned and discriminated against and rejected all her life. So she felt like that she had no choice but to defend herself. So to me, the behavior is justified, because she was simply trying to, it wasn't vengeance. She wasn't necessarily angry. She was afraid. She was defending herself. That's the way she saw it. But the point I wrote, and I was very, very careful with the ending. I could have written it differently. I could have had Chase almost kill her. And then the ending would have been easier for people to accept. I wanted it to be a very thin line. I wanted people to get to the end and ask themselves, first I wanted them to be surprised at the ending. And then I wanted them to ask, was that the right thing for her to do? Should she have done that? And then I wanted the answer to be, yes, it was the right thing to do. But I didn't want it to be clear cut. I wanted it to be a question and an answer. I wanted us to think about that if we have laws that don't protect people all the way, then we're going to find ourselves in situations where people, and I'm not saying it's right to take the law into your own hands. I'm not saying it's right. This is not morality. This ending is not about morality. It's about instinct. It's about how we will behave if we're pushed, if we are threatened. And you know what? I think most people can understand. Most people accepted the ending, I think, but a great majority of people. But anyone who questions it, when I talk to them about it, I like to say, how far would you go to protect your child? Is there anything you wouldn't do to protect your child? And that shows, that emotion, that thinking of it that way makes us realize, yes, we will go farther than we think, or further than we think we should go, if it comes to the crunch.
There's a moment we shared where I think it's appropriate to interject this story to only further your point. It's I told you about my upbringing, how some children in my community did not have enough money to eat, nor did they have adults in their family that could provide them with a meal. So periodically, friends of mine that I grew up with would go to the store and steal food just so they wouldn't starve. And the question you asked me was, well, do you think that's wrong? And I froze, like I'm sure many people did at the end of your story, because the question is, if a child is hungry and there's no one to provide food and they don't have the means to provide it for themselves, well, how many choices do they have? And it's the necessity to survive outweigh the quote unquote crime. It's
Well, I write it very early in the book. I've forgotten which page it's on. It's like page 7 or 8. Very early in the book, I have a paragraph, and I can't sit here and quote it, unfortunately. But it's something to the effect that when we are threatened, when you are threatened, our instincts come out. That's all you say. It's not morality. It's simple math. We have the genetics, the genes are in us to protect ourselves and to behave in certain ways. And when it comes down to being truly threatened, you will behave differently than you might think you will. Yes, that's what it was all about.
Okay. Let's go to the next question. I want to make sure we get a few more in. You have been asked, what's your favorite memory from your time at UGA?
Oh, okay. My favorite. Okay, well, I have to say that my experience at UGA was absolutely fantastic. And I got my PhD at California. I left the University of Georgia with a bachelor in science in zoology. And yet I felt qualified to go to Africa and study wildlife. I mean, and so I just think that says a lot about UGA. But what meant the most to me were the individual experiences I had with professors. There we were, we had large classes and so forth, but I can remember Murray Blum, Ernie Provost. I can remember my professors like they were yesterday. It was individual professors. But I had my greatest experience was I worked in the entomology lab for Dr. Murray Blum. And he was a character, and there was this professor who was studying honeybees, Dr. Dietz. And so Murray Blum was always playing tricks on Dr. Dietz. And Murray was studying flies at one stage. I mean, it was entomology. And so he hid these, he got these jars of maggots. I don't know how many. And we went into Dr. Dietz's office and we hid these maggots behind the books, in the shelves, behind the desk and everything. So that 2 or 3 days later, there were thousands of flies in Dr. Dietz's office. And we're in the lab working, and we hear this big loud voice booming down the hall as he comes down to, he was very upset. He knew exactly who had done it. So that was part of the fun we had.
And I would say that's a great memory.
Can you read that?
And we have another question. Yeah. After Kaya's mother leaves her, most of the figures in her life, except Mabel, are men. Was that intentional? And what made you focus on those male relationships?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I've never gotten that question. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
After Kaya's mother leaves her,
mostly male.
Her life, except Mabel, are men.
And what
was that intentional? And what made you focus on those male relationships?
Well, it's interesting that I never really thought about it, but yes, it was intentional because males were attracted to her. She was an attractive young lady living out in the wild, so they were attracted to her. I think Tate, as I said before, in a kind of way, in a more intellectual way, he was fascinated with her, and Chase in a more basic, fundamental way. And then Jumpin', and in fact, I made Mabel part of it, but Jumpin' was the one who was at the wharf all the time. So he was the one that she mainly interacted with. But also I wanted to have I wanted to develop her having this relationship with another race and another sex, because it was just expanding her horizons. It was reaching out to someone that she was very different from. And in my life, I've had the experience that you can, in Africa, we were usually very, very isolated, but when we did come in contact with and we had worked with Africans, we were working with people who were very, very different. Language, lifestyle, everything was very different. And when you all of us know when you're faced with people who are different, first thing you feel are the differences. That's the first thing you feel. Let's be honest, that's the first thing you feel. Then it doesn't take but a few seconds to see beyond that. And when you see, as soon as you see beyond the differences, you see how alike you are. And then once you reach that stage, then it's when you can feel the love, and you introduce yourself to a whole new world by associating with people who are different. And that's the reason I wanted jumping to be a different race. I'd never really thought about the male-female part that much, but that was the reason I wanted him to be different from her.
That's awesome. That's a great point. We have another question. Are you ready to move on to the next one?
Sure.
Okay. Kaya's story is so unique, and yet it resonated with so many different people. Why do you think so many have connected to this story?
I think this is connected. I think so many people have connected with this story because we are all in many ways like Kaya.
Yeah.
We may live in a city, we may live in a large town, we may live in a small town, everybody we know surrounding us, and still be very lonely. And that was one of her biggest problems. We also lack self-confidence. We also feel rejected during our lives. Most of us experience that. And so, and Kaya experienced all these things. But the great thing about Kaya, she showed us that we're like her in that way. She also showed us, I was the author, okay? I thought I was in charge and I was writing Kaya. But she took off on her own, and she taught me what she taught me, and what she taught all of us is every time I threw an obstacle in her way, she solved it.
Yes.
So she shows us that even when we are alone, even when we have to solve a problem by ourselves, we can find that inner strength, that resilience to solve the problems by ourselves. And I think that's very important for a lot of people. We get help all during their lives. And a lot of times we live in partnerships and groups and do things as partners, but it's also so inspiring to be able to solve something by yourself.
What do you think allows someone to have that confidence to solve a problem on their own? Because not everyone doesn't have that.
Well, and that's a very good question. And I think that usually self-confidence comes from good parenting, having good parents, having good experiences, having good experiences in school. But I do think that I do think that is that real resilience in us that can, when we have to, we can bring it out. I can remember the first time I had to change a tire all by myself in the middle of the bush. And I can remember all these things that I had to do on my own that I didn't. And by the way, they used to say, for all these ecology students who are going out to study in the wild, and they used to say, what class would you recommend that these students take? And I always say auto mechanics, because you can't be in the middle of the bush. But that just proves the point. You have to be able to do things on your own.
There's a moment where I shared with you before we got on the live that I'm a strong believer that reading books play a tremendous role in helping with that confidence. And we saw in your story where there were moments where Kaya had these very intimate moments with books, with language, with words, and obviously transpired to be something she became heavily involved with. It's not a question. That's just me making a statement by saying, I know reading has played a tremendous role in my life, and watching it play a role in the life of Kaya was inspiring. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So
No, but I mean, that was a big part of the story. Her life changed when she learned to read. Her life changed, and I didn't. Even though that wasn't a question, I can comment on that by saying that was a very important part of the story, and I think it was prominent. I think a lot of people realized that.
Yeah.
That she struggled and made it, but when she learned to read.
Yes. I understand completely. I understand. I want to dive in, but I want to make sure we get to the audience question. Mother Nature has such a rich character, and Kaya was always longing for her mother. I am curious to know your thoughts on your decision to not make Kaya a mother herself.
Okay. Well, for one thing, there are several reasons. The main reason, as far as the storyline goes, is that the point of Kaya is that she was mostly alone.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, there were so many things in this story that had to happen at the end. And just from just the structure of writing a novel, you can't have too many things happen at the end. I mean, you're building up. I mean, I'd never written a novel before, and I don't know all the terminology, like having the arc of this and the arc of that. I can't sit here and tell you that, but I do know that as far as the flow and as far as the you have to hit that ending. The ending has to be very powerful, and you just can't have, well, she got married and then they had a new house and then they had a baby, and then you just can't go on and on. There's only so much that can happen. So, but the main reason is that I wanted to continue with the theme that she was mostly alone and how that affected her life.
Okay.
Last question.
Last question. This is the best one of the day. Do you have plans of writing another book in the near future?
Well, the only good thing about COVID-19 is that I did think that, okay, I'm isolated. I had all these plans of things I was going to do. But since I've had to stay home anyway, I took the time to write another novel. And I have completed the third draft. I'm excited about that, although it's a long way from finished. I think I must have done 15 or 20 drafts of Crawdads. I don't remember. It took 10 years to write, many drafts. So I look at this as a good start. The third draft is a good start. And that's as far as I've got.
Process going into your second fiction story? Is it much smoother? I'm assuming you're not. Well, I guess your Where the Crawdads Sing still requires a lot of attention, I'm sure. But are you able to focus on that next book completely?
No, not completely. I don't think you ever reach that point in life, but it has been a good time to write. But like as we were talking about earlier, isolation gives a lot of time for writing. It doesn't give a lot of inspiration for writing. For inspiration's been difficult, but I feel I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the theme, but I have. Would
you like to share the theme?
No.
Okay. I'm only asking for the audience.
It actually is too long to explain, and but it has the same basic fundamental. It's another socio-biological suspense. I'll say that much.
In other words, it's going to be another bestseller.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's I love the process. I love some of the process.
You're extraordinary, and you really are. And I know you've spent a lot of time alone. And when COVID is over, maybe we can get together and talk more about.
We have to do that.
and talk about The Selfish Gene, a book that you recommend I read. And just talk about life in general. You have a lot of insight, and your perspective is beautiful. And every time we speak, it helps me grow as an individual. And I'm sure the audience feels the same way throughout this conversation.
And the audience feels the same way about you too. You have been an inspiration to so many people. And I love what you're doing now with young readers.
I appreciate you. If you don't have this book, which I can't completely understand
And this
why you
book,
would not
and this
have
book.
this book, you should go get it right now, and you should hope that someday you run into Dr. Owens so she can sign your copy, because this is a legendary book.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, y'all, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dr. Owens, but y'all are so great, and I really enjoyed listening to y'all converse. And Dr. Owens, if there's an auto mechanics class at UGA, I'll try. But this was so great. Thank you, guys. Both Malcolm and Dr. Owens have strong connections to the University of Georgia, and we can't thank them enough for sharing their time with us today. Dr. Owens is a proud supporter of UGA and has agreed to donate her archives to the UGA libraries. And so thank you so much, Dr. Owens, for supporting your alma mater. If tonight's discussions inspires you to support one of the schools, colleges, or causes discussed this evening, we encourage you to donate to one of the funds at UGA designed to support the students who are studying to solve some of these grand challenges. And friendly reminder that today's presentation is a part of Between the Pages series, and to check out the upcoming sessions at alumni.uga.edu/BTP. Please grab a copy of Malcolm's new book, My Very Favorite Book in the Whole Wide World, and follow along with Malcolm and the Share the Magic Foundation on Facebook and Instagram at Read with Malcolm. And you can also follow along with Dr. Delia Owens on Facebook and Instagram at author Delia Owens, as we anticipate more details on the release of the movie. We are excited to announce our next book club selection, so please join us on March 24th at 7 p.m. as we gather alongside students to celebrate the 60th anniversary of desegregation at UGA. We'll be discussing the book In My Place with author Charlene Hunter-Galt during a virtual Q&A just like this one, so keep your eye out for an evite in the coming weeks. Thank you everyone who joined this evening, and as always, go Dogs.